Sit Down Before Reading, a memoir, by me, Dave Bexfield. Chapter 10, Zebra Found. Come on, we have time, we can be quick. I wanted to maximize the fleeting remaining hours of our short vacation. We had spent the last few days with my parents doing the tourist thing, but they flew home the previous day. Our flight to Albuquerque didn't leave until the afternoon, and after a breakfast swimming in calories courtesy of our B&B, a short hike seemed like a positively brilliant idea. Emphasis on brilliant. Laura was not so sure. Hike equals sweat, and bug spray equals more stink. Two unappealing additions right before a day of cross-country air travel with 2 layovers. But it's only in the 50s, so at most you'll get a little moist, I argued, instantly regretting using the term moist, a word that does not typically spark joy. And it's still early in the day, so the bugs won't be on the munch. We could skip the insect repellent for the short hour and stick to the center of the trail to avoid any opportunistic lurkers, I reasoned. I was working every bodily perfume angle I could. My brilliant idea, begrudgingly, was agreed to, and the innkeepers at the Bee and Thistle steered us to a pleasant local network of short trails just a minute up the road, a mere 0.7 miles away. The George and Woodward H. Griswold Preserve, Kismet. It was September 20th, 2004, in Old Lyme, Connecticut. Journal entry. Nice breakfast, then hike in small preserve before heading off to airport. When Laura and I started reading the Sunday New York Times, it was more out of necessity than a strategic plan to stay abreast of pressing news. To avoid getting sick before and after my 2010 stem cell transplant in Houston, we mostly stayed in our Montrose neighborhood home, and I had brought 0 books to read for our scheduled 3-month stay. The Times was our respite, an escape from our medical appointments and blood draws and endless MRIs. Today, it's still our Sunday routine, and on that October 21 morning, after it had been broken in by Laura, I settled into the Sunday Review, recently renamed Sunday Opinion, the op-ed section of the paper. I don't go out of my way to read missives by hair-on-fire, angry-at-the-world columnists, or evenly moderately annoyed, measured columnists. I don't like to start my Sundays riled up. But the day's entry by Ross Douthat, a regular columnist for the Times, was a departure from his usual geopolitical observations or religious contemplations. It was about how he became a sick person like me. As someone with a chronic illness, his story was achingly familiar. Puzzling symptoms, a hunt for a diagnosis, the desperate scramble for relief. Funny, he also suspected Lyme disease, just like I had when I got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis back in 2005. Except it turns out Mr. Douthat finally got confirmation that he really was struggling with Lyme. My tests for the disease were always negative. The retest I insisted on taking, and then the retest of the retest after that. Always negative. In the years that followed my MS diagnosis, I often brought up with my neuro at our annual appointments that I believed I may have Lyme disease, that I remembered the tick and the rash, plucking it out of my scalp in the shower on a warm Indian summer day, my bathroom's glass block windows rippling the late afternoon sunlight, only to watch the invader swirl down the drain before I could identify the culprit. Just an errant boil or blackhead, probably. Shortly after, hiding the red striped blemish on my forehead, that I thought at the time was merely a rather bizarre sunburn or a rash from wearing a sweaty baseball cap with Julius Caesar bangs. I told Laura that I had decided to try the George Clooney look. The answer from my neuro was always the same. Your symptoms are classic MS, but we could retest you. Retest me with the same test that consistently came attached to the all-clear result of neg every time. Eventually, I stopped asking in 2018. But now I kept rereading the end of Mr. Douthat's piece. The antibiotics stabilized him, just as they appeared to stabilize me. But his symptoms were way different than mine. We couldn't have the same disease. Could we? Lyme is all about mysterious, murky, hard to define symptoms, not neurological, MS-y ones. Plus, I had all the typical neurological markers for the many scars disease: brain lesions, spinal lesions, telltale banding in my spinal fluid, Hermetes sign, Babinski's reflex, all of it. But just to confirm, I figured I'd check with the website of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the National Public Health Agency of the United States. Taken from the CDC website. Lyme disease is the most common vector-borne disease in the United States. Lyme disease is caused by the bacterium Borrelia burgdorferi and rarely Borrelia mayoni. It is transmitted to humans through the bite of infected black-legged ticks. Typical symptoms include fever, headache, fatigue, and a characteristic skin rash called erythema migrans. If left untreated, infection can spread to joints, the heart, and the nervous system. Lyme disease is diagnosed based on symptoms, physical findings, e.g., rash, and the possibility of exposure to infected ticks. Laboratory testing is helpful if used correctly and performed with validated methods. Most cases of Lyme disease can be treated successfully with a few weeks of antibiotics. Steps to prevent Lyme disease include using insect repellent, removing ticks promptly, applying pesticides, and reducing tick habitat. The ticks that transmit Lyme disease can occasionally transmit other tick-borne diseases as well. Interesting. Plausible. Then I clicked on signs and symptoms of untreated Lyme disease. Let's put this fantasy to bed. I froze. Later signs and symptoms, days to months after tick bite. Severe headaches and neck stiffness. Additional EM rashes on other areas of the body. Facial palsy, loss of muscle tone or droop on one or both sides of the face. Arthritis with severe joint pain and swelling, particularly the knees and other large joints. Intermittent pain in tendons, muscles, joints, and bones. Heart palpitations or an irregular heartbeat, Lyme carditis. Episodes of dizziness or shortness of breath. Inflammation of the brain and spinal cord. Nerve pain, shooting pains, numbness, or tingling in the hands or feet. The stroke-like symptoms when I was diagnosed, when I only half smiled in the mirror, the spine and brain lesions that followed, all the numbness and tingling in my extremities. Well, duh, this can all be explained. It's classic MS. But add in the intermittent joint pain, swollen knee, odd rash, and irregular heartbeat, and that Lyme disease fantasy just sat bolt upright in bed, all movie cliche-like. I rushed to get my journals from that time and started frantically poring over them as if my life depended on it, because it did. September 25th, 2005. At 10:15 p.m., noticed side was numb. Waited, but did not go away, so went to emergency room and got CAT scan to check for stroke. Right side mostly numb, especially chest. The evidence bled through the crime scenes of my '04 Tuscany and Provence, '05 weird US, and '06 Get Fuzzy desk calendars. September 20th. Nice breakfast, then hike in small preserve before heading off to airport. January 7th. Wrist in mega pain during dinner overseas. Called docs back in US. September 25th. Went to emergency room and got CAT scan to check for stroke. December 14th. Orthopedist looked at me and basically said, unlikely MS, knee still swollen. January 25th. Resting heart rate is 100 beats per minute, way high compared to my usual rate in the mid-70s. Very odd. MS? Something else? September 21st. Met with infectious disease doc and got tested for West Nile, AIDS, and Lyme. Again, my request. He's baffled as well. Might just be MS with odd symptoms, which is fine and dandy, if that's the case. Might just be MS with odd symptoms, which is fine and dandy, I wrote on February 21st, 2005, with this prophetic disclaimer, if that's the case. At that moment, it was becoming crystal clear that most definitely wasn't the case. When it comes to my health, I'm obsessively thorough, meticulous, methodical. Actually, that's not the whole truth. I'm that way with vacation planning, cooking for more than one, organizing my digital music, sorting through vacation photos, cleaning out junk drawers overstuffed with technically operational, but should have been tossed years ago, ink pens. Okay, fine. That's the way I am. Anal about the details. So I was sure that when I was getting diagnosed with MS, I had dutifully recorded every twitch, every hiccup, every errant nose hair. I did. My God, did I ever. In reams of notes and in letters to my diagnosing neurologist. On November 23rd, 2005, I wrote to the doctor who initially diagnosed me. I passed the visual evoked potential test in normal ranges all around. After talking with the MS specialist nurse in more detail later, she said a swollen knee is not common with MS. Try Googling MS and swollen knee, and all you get is pages of Lyme disease misdiagnosed as MS. And suggested I see a doctor about the knee. I am now using a hinged brace. But it was my letter to my MS specialist on January 26, 2006, that left no doubt. I have a strange symptom that appears directly related to my demyelinating event that triggered my attack, September 25th. I've been tracking my heart rate for a couple months, and something is definitely not right. My typical heart rate during the day is now 100 to 110 beats per minute. Ever since the attack in late September, my heart rate has been 25 to 35 beats per minute higher than normal. As I type this, my heart rate is humming at 104 beats per minute. As a daily exerciser for the past 8 years, I'm in excellent physical condition. At first, I thought I was out of shape for not exercising due to my knee pain for a few weeks, but now, after returning to my regimen for the last few months, I'm concerned. I proceeded to detail 5 years of heart rates recorded at previous medical appointments. 74 beats per minute, 9105, 72 beats per minute, 52405, 76 beats per minute, 72904, 80 beats per minute, 22404, 80 beats per minute, 123003, 68 beats per minute, 12502, 72 beats per minute, 41501. When I exercise now, my heart rate jumps very quickly, often under a minute, into the target zone, 130 to 160 plus, with minimal effort, and the lowest I can get my heart rate to drop to in my cool-down phase is in the high 120s. Before, it would take 5+ minutes to raise my heart rate, and I could lower it into the 105 to 115 range. I believe the timing of the high heart rate and the attack suggests it is too coincidental not to be related. I closed that January letter by spilling the last of my evidence onto the examination table for the conclusive autopsy to come, that turned out to be anything but conclusive. Any ideas? A reminder, I've traveled to some odd and not so odd places in the months prior to the onset of symptoms. Vietnam, January 05, Cambodia, January 05, and Connecticut, fall 04. In Connecticut, I hiked through the woods of Old Lyme. The only odd occurrence happened in Cambodia, when my right wrist went from mildly achy to very painful over the course of a day. File after file in my MS Health folder on my PC complained about my knee, my heart, but there was one file I almost couldn't bear to open, one titled simply Lyme, dated March 17th, 2006. 54 pages, culled from dozens of websites, all discussing how easy it is to misdiagnose the tick-borne disease for multiple sclerosis, how negative test results could not be trusted, how CSF banding was in no way definitive, how paying attention to the clinical signs was paramount, how lesions on MRI could deceive. Because encephalomyelitis clinically may result in prominent pyramidal, sensory, or cerebellar syndromes, and because MRI lesions resemble demyelination, patients with Lyme disease may be mistakenly diagnosed as having multiple sclerosis. In all, I saw 2 neurologists, 1 MS specialist, an orthopedist, an infectious disease doctor, 2 cardiologists, and a weekend of wearing a Holter monitor, and countless other doctors, from my then PCP to a stream of ER docs. And I told anyone who would listen, knee, wrist, heart, all following a visit to Old Lyme, Connecticut in the fall of 2004. For the 6 months it took me to get diagnosed with MS, it was as if I was hollering my concerns into an empty high school gymnasium, my words echoing off the stacked wooden bleachers, basketball backboards, standing sentry at either end. Hello? Is anyone listening? Hello? Hello. It's been Lyme disease this entire time. My hands tightly squeezed Laura's. No, tighter. I searched her face for agreement, for affirmation. She had to see that the evidence was clear-cut, indisputable, unquestionable. I want to believe. Laura, my brilliant scientist of a wife, was either channeling FBI agents Fox Mulder and Dana Scully from the X-Files, or just being her normal, let's be sure about this stuff before we reach conclusions self. Especially since my mental state was at the time in one hell of a state. And I do. Even though I was one good breakdown away from a padded room, Laura believed me. She believed me. Now I just had to get my doctors to believe me, starting with my neurologist of 17 years. Days later, I was finished with my revelatory email, courteous, professional, and detailed with evidence, and typed into the subject line, "Zebra found. Sit down before reading. Sorry." After one final proof, yes, I am 100% confident in this diagnosis, and reaffirmed that opinion in my letter, I click send. There was nothing more to do than wait. And wait. And wait. But my disease was not going to wait. 2 days later, I sent off another urgent email to my neurologist, who had always gotten back to me promptly. Doctor, my UTI is going to return quickly, so we need to choose another antibiotic. Doxycycline? That I take continuously until we bring out the big guns. Doc, I am scared. The mental issues that surfaced after the last gap in antibiotics started to return before I started the next course. This thing is going after my brain. Time is critical. Help. The country's leading experts are at Johns Hopkins. Please call them. I again was back in my high school's gym, only now my plaintive calls of hello soon turned to panicked screams that futilely bounced off the walls to a crowd of zero. The devil had returned.